Basic Instinct turned one disputed moment into permanent Hollywood history. Sharon Stone says she was misled about how much of her body would appear on screen. Paul Verhoeven says she understood what was being filmed. That conflict has never been fully settled, but the image no longer needs a verdict. It became the film's most famous asset, helped make Stone a global star, and followed her long after the scene ended. The movie kept its prestige. Verhoeven kept the authority of the auteur. Stone carried the burden of a moment everyone recognized and far fewer people questioned. When a contested act becomes iconic, who gets remembered as the artist and who is left carrying the image? The argument begins with a distinction that popular memory usually removes. Stone agreed to perform the interrogation scene. The unresolved question is whether she understood the exact level of exposure the camera would record and the final cut would reveal. In her memoir, she wrote that she was asked to remove her underwear because the white fabric reflected the lights. She said she was assured that the camera would not show anything explicit. Verhoeven has rejected that account and maintained that she knew what they were filming. No public record has settled the contradiction. That uncertainty matters because consent on a film set is not one broad permission covering every possible image. An actor can agree to a movement, a costume, or the dramatic purpose of a scene while relying on specific assurances about framing and editing. Stone's account is not that she refused to enter the room or refused to perform Catherine Trammell's calculated provocation. Her objection is that the finished image exceeded what she had been told the camera would capture. Verhoeven's answer is that no such misunderstanding existed. The two versions cannot simply be combined into a comforting middle ground. Either the level of exposure was understood before filming, or it was not. What can be said with confidence is that the people at the center of the scene later described that understanding differently, and the finished film preserved no visible sign of the dispute. Stone wrote that she first saw the completed image at a screening attended by agents and lawyers. She described confronting Verhoeven and striking him. Her lawyer, she said, told her that she might be able to seek an injunction against the release. Stone chose not to pursue that option. She believed the scene worked for Catherine and for the film. That decision is often treated as proof that the earlier objection no longer mattered. It does not settle the issue so neatly. Accepting a finished scene after seeing its dramatic effect is not the same as understanding every element before the camera rolls. A performer can believe a shot belongs in the film and still object to the process by which it was obtained. Stone's later approval gave the image permission to remain. It did not erase her account of how she first encountered it. Verhoeven's denial must also remain in the record. He has consistently defended the scene as planned and understood. The point is not to convert his account into guilt or Stone's account into unquestionable fact. The point is that Hollywood canonized the image before the disagreement became part of the way most audiences understood it. The final cut looked controlled. Catherine looked controlled. The room, the camera, and the edit appeared to obey one precise design. That visual confidence encouraged a simple conclusion. Everyone involved must have shared the same plan. Stone's testimony broke that assumption. The scene, therefore, carries two histories. One is visible. Catherine Trammell sits before a group of detectives and turns their scrutiny back on them. The other exists behind the image, a dispute over disclosure, camera knowledge, and who held enough authority to define what had occurred. The audience received only the first history in 1992. The second arrived later, after the image had already become famous, profitable, and difficult to question without appearing to challenge the film itself. That timing protected the work. Basic Instinct did not have to pause while the culture examined production ethics. It entered theaters as a major erotic thriller, generated controversy, and converted that controversy into attention. The dispute remained private while the image became public. The scene's artistic power is real. So is the disagreement attached to its creation. Reputation Wars begins where those truths collide. The finished work became cleaner with time, while the performer was left explaining why the process did not feel clean to her. Long before the interrogation scene became public property, the production had already established who entered the room with leverage and who did not. Stone had attracted attention in Total Recall, but she was not yet protected as a major leading star. Michael Douglas was. The difference could be seen in salary, status, and the authority each name carried into negotiations. Stone later said she received about $500,000 for Basic Instinct, while Douglas was paid roughly $14 million. The gap reflected his established box office position, but it also showed how differently the two performers approached the same project. Douglas arrived as the recognized commercial anchor. Stone carried much of the film's reputational and physical exposure without comparable bargaining power. A pay gap does not reveal every contract clause. It does not prove that Stone lacked all legal protection or that Douglas personally controlled the production. It does show who the studio already considered indispensable. One performer entered as a proven star whose presence helped secure the film. The other entered knowing that the role might create her career, but could also attach its most controversial material directly to her name. Several established actresses had reportedly passed on Catherine Trammell. Their reasons were not identical, and it would be careless to claim that each refused solely because of the interrogation scene. The role carried obvious risks: explicit material, a bisexual character already criticized by activists, a violent, erotic thriller, and a woman whose intelligence and sexuality were designed to unsettle the audience rather than reassure it. Stone accepted those risks from a weaker institutional position. That was part of what made the opportunity attractive to the production. She had enough recognition to be credible, but not enough power to dictate the conditions under which the film would be edited, marketed, or remembered. Her authority existed mainly inside the performance. Stone made Catherine Trammell more than a conventional seductress. She played her as a woman who understood the room before anyone spoke. The detectives carried badges, procedure, and the assumption that they were entitled to examine her. Catherine answered with stillness. She watched their discomfort, controlled the pace, and treated their authority as something she could test. The performance depended on precision. A pause lasted long enough to make a questioner uncertain. A glance suggested that Catherine understood what a man wanted before he admitted it. Her humor made the detectives look exposed, even while they believed she was the subject under examination. That is why the scene became so powerful. Stone did not present Catherine as a passive body arranged for male attention. She made the character aware of every gaze and willing to use it. The men watched her. She watched what watching did to them. But control inside the fiction was not control over production. Stone did not own the camera. She did not possess final cut authority. She did not decide which frame would become the center of the advertising campaign or which few seconds would be replayed for decades. The better she performed Catherine's command, the easier it became for the public to assume that the actress must have held the same command behind the camera. The illusion protected the image. Viewers saw a woman who appeared incapable of being surprised or overpowered. That made Stone's later account harder for some people to accept. They confused the character's control with the performer's contractual and editorial position. The contradiction became the scene's hidden structure. Catherine Trammell controlled the interrogation room. Sharon Stone did not control the final image leaving the set. Hollywood could celebrate the first fact without discussing the second. The performance earned Stone a Golden Globe nomination and helped turn her into an international star. Basic Instinct earned roughly $353 million worldwide. The film proved that Stone could hold the center of a major production. It also proved that one image of her could generate attention far beyond the story surrounding it. Her breakthrough, therefore, arrived with a condition already attached. The public would know her, but it would know her through a moment whose production she and the director would later describe in incompatible ways. Fame gave Stone more leverage after the release. It did not retroactively give her equal power during the filming that created it. The star was born from an imbalance the finished movie made almost impossible to see. The interrogation scene did not remain inside the film. It escaped the plot separated from Catherine Trammell's motives and became a portable piece of culture. People could recognize the reference without remembering the murder investigation, the supporting characters, or the ending. A few seconds became enough to identify the entire movie and, eventually, the actress herself. That portability made the image unusually valuable. It could appear in television discussions, comedy sketches, anniversary articles, retrospectives, and public debate. Each repetition renewed interest in Basic Instinct without requiring another advertising campaign. The controversy did not reduce the scene's commercial power. It became part of that power. Outrage and curiosity often worked together. Moral condemnation told audiences that the film contained something they were not supposed to ignore. News coverage amplified the question. Viewers bought tickets partly to understand what the argument was about. The studio did not need every person to approve of the scene. It needed them to know it existed. Once the image became iconic, its status began to clean the history around it. Iconic described the result. The scene was recognizable, influential, and impossible to remove from the film's reputation. The word said nothing about whether the people involved shared the same understanding before filming. Celebration gradually crowded out examination. Verhoeven's reputation benefited from the scene's endurance. It confirmed the image of a director willing to provoke audiences and push commercial cinema toward discomfort. The film benefited because one moment gave it a permanent place in conversations about erotic thrillers, censorship, gender, and screen sexuality. Stone benefited too. The scene made her instantly bankable and gave her access to major projects, money, and influence that had not been available before. A serious account cannot pretend that Basic Instinct produced only damage. The same film that trapped her inside one public image also gave her the power to challenge studios later, but the benefits were not distributed in the same form. The director kept the reputation for artistic daring. The studio kept the film as an asset. Stone became the person whose body remained inseparable from the controversy. When the scene was praised, she was called fearless. When it was condemned, she became the face of the objection. When it was parodied, the joke still depended on public recognition of her body. The image became public property. The consequences stayed personal. That imbalance shaped the roles that followed. Stone later described being typecast in variations of the dangerous seductress or calculating man-eater. The industry had discovered a profitable shorthand. It knew that audiences would accept her as a woman whose sexuality carried threat, manipulation, or violence. Repeating that formula appeared safer than testing the full range of the performer who had created it. The scripts could change the setting and character names while preserving the same commercial instruction. Be controlled, be dangerous, be desirable, make men uncertain, carry the film's sexual tension and the moral judgment attached to it. Basic Instinct opened doors, but many led back to Catherine Trammell. Typecasting is often described as a lack of imagination. It is also a financial system. A studio invests in what it believes audiences already understand. Once an actor becomes associated with a profitable image, every departure appears to create unnecessary risk. Stone's fame increased her choices, but the market kept placing those choices inside a narrow frame. That frame simplified her achievement. Catherine was not memorable only because the role was sexual. Stone built the character from intelligence, timing, social confidence, and an ability to make powerful men look foolish. The industry frequently extracted the surface while leaving the craft behind. The public did something similar. It remembered the exposure more easily than the acting required to control the entire sequence. A contested physical image became the summary of a performance that depended on far more than the body visible in the frame. This was the first lasting cost. Stone had become known everywhere, but the image that made her visible also began deciding what people believed they already knew about her. Stone did not accept that limitation quietly. The success of Basic Instinct gave her money and influence, and she tried to convert both into creative authority. The clearest example came during The Quick and the Dead, when she backed a young Leonardo DiCaprio after the studio resisted hiring him. Stone later said that the executives did not want to pay for an actor they considered unproven. She had seen his audition and believed he was right for the role. Rather than surrender the casting decision, she agreed to cover his salary herself. The gesture has often been retold as an act of generosity. It was also a practical use of power. Stone had spent years as the performer whose value other people controlled. On this production, she was also a producer. She could not dictate every decision, but she had enough leverage to place her own money behind a creative judgment the studio had rejected. That mattered because Hollywood had frequently treated her authority as an extension of her fame, rather than as evidence of artistic intelligence. The business understood that her face could sell tickets. It was slower to recognize that she could evaluate actors, shape a production, and accept financial responsibility for a choice. Paying DiCaprio's salary did not prove that Stone had escaped the system. It showed the price of making the system listen. The studio accepted her decision because she absorbed the risk herself. The Quick and the Dead did not become the commercial triumph that would have settled every argument about her producing instincts. DiCaprio soon became one of the most important actors of his generation, and Stone's judgment aged better than the hesitation surrounding it. The episode revealed a form of authority that the Catherine Tramell image had obscured. Stone was not only the person being watched, she could decide who else deserved to be seen. Casino offered a more public answer to the question of her range. Martin Scorsese cast her as Ginger McKenna, a woman whose beauty functions less as control than as unstable currency inside a violent marriage in a criminal world. Ginger could manipulate people, but she was not protected by perfect calculation. Fear, addiction, anger, loyalty, and panic kept breaking through the performance she gave to everyone around her. Stone's work in Casino depended on disorder. Catherine Tramell remained calm because control was her weapon. Ginger often understood that the room was dangerous without knowing how to escape it. She could be cruel, frightened, seductive, desperate, and destructive in the same stretch of the story. The performance earned Stone a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. That recognition directly challenged the commercial shortcut created by Basic Instinct. She had not been typecast because she lacked range. She had been typecast because one version of her had earned too much money for the industry to abandon easily. Casino proved that Stone could carry emotional collapse as convincingly as she had carried perfect composure. The role also showed what had been lost when Hollywood treated Catherine Tramell as the complete explanation for her talent. Awards, however, do not automatically rewrite public memory. Ginger McKenna entered the record as one of Stone's strongest performances, but the interrogation scene still followed her into interviews, profiles, jokes, and career retrospectives. Casino required viewers to remember a full emotional arc. Basic Instinct required only one recognizable frame. The shorter image one, the faster recall. That imbalance explains why later success could not fully replace the original label. Stone gained proof of range, producing experience and greater leverage. She still had to compete with a cultural object that no longer needed context to identify her. The industry could acknowledge that she was more than Catherine Tramell while continuing to market her through Catherine's image. Public memory could praise Casino and still return to the same few seconds whenever Sharon Stone's name appeared. The work expanded. The label remained efficient. By the end of the 1990s, Stone had achieved the authority that Basic Instinct initially denied her. She had major awards, producing influence, financial power, and a recognizable name, yet that authority remained tied to continued visibility and physical availability. In 2001, a medical crisis exposed how quickly professional power could disappear when the performer could no longer serve the system that had built its plans around her. The stroke did not arrive as a symbolic punishment or a final act in a Hollywood story. It was a separate medical emergency. In 2001, Stone suffered a stroke and a brain hemorrhage that she later said continued for 9 days. The event interrupted her career at a point when she had spent years building leverage and began a recovery that would last far longer than the industry's attention span. She described losing abilities that had once been automatic. Reading became difficult. Speech changed. Walking required work. The face and voice that Hollywood had treated as reliable commercial instruments were no longer immediately available on demand. Recovery happened outside the rhythm of production. Film schedules move quickly. Studios plan around insurance, financing, release dates, and performers who can meet fixed physical demands. Stone's health required time, repetition, and privacy. The business did not stop while she learned how to function again. Her public image remained perfectly usable. Basic Instinct could still be sold, broadcast, rented, discussed, and replayed. The interrogation scene required no new labor from Stone. It continued generating recognition while the woman inside it struggled with tasks the audience never saw. That contrast exposed the durability of the product. Hollywood images can remain young, healthy, and available after the people who created them have changed. A film does not need the performer to recover. It needs the existing footage to keep circulating. Stone later said that people took advantage of her weakened condition and that the $18 million she had saved disappeared from her accounts. That statement belongs to her account of the period. It should not be rewritten as proof that a studio took the money or that the entertainment industry organized the loss. What it shows is how illness reduced her ability to monitor finances, protect her position, and recognize who was acting in her interest. Fame had made her visible. It had not made her safe. Her absence from major work had several causes. The medical crisis removed her from active production. Recovery took years. Age changed how studios assessed her commercial value. The industry rarely offers patience to women whose careers were built partly around physical image, especially when they return older, medically vulnerable, and no longer positioned as the newest discovery. Health concerns, a long absence from production, and changing casting priorities made her return increasingly difficult. The famous image survived while the career around it became harder to rebuild. The years after the stroke also brought divorce and a custody dispute involving her son, Roan. Stone later said that the stigma surrounding Basic Instinct entered those proceedings. She recalled a judge asking her young son whether he knew that his mother made what the judge called sex movies. That recollection is powerful, but it cannot carry the entire legal case. Public reporting also referred to broader disputes involving stability, location, scheduling, and medical decisions. The available record does not establish that Basic Instinct alone determined the custody outcome. Stone did not lose all contact with her son, and it would be inaccurate to describe the ruling as a complete removal from motherhood. The court kept Roan's primary residence with his father during the school year. Stone continued seeking a larger role in his daily life and later described the dispute as one of the most painful experiences she had endured. The role of the film belongs to her account of how she experienced that judgment. She believed Catherine Trammell had entered a room where Catherine should have had no authority. Acting in an adult thriller had become part of the language used to discuss her moral fitness as a mother. The culture had celebrated Stone for becoming the character, then appeared willing to treat the transformation as evidence about the woman herself. That is a deeper form of typecasting. It no longer concerns only which scripts arrive. The public image begins to function as a character reference in private life. The irony was severe. Hollywood had sold Catherine Trammell as fiction and earned hundreds of millions of dollars from the performance. Stone believed the same culture later struggled to keep a boundary between that fiction and her identity as a parent. The stronger historical conclusion is not that Basic Instinct caused every loss that followed. It did not cause her stroke. The film alone does not explain the custody ruling. It does not explain every financial or professional setback. The more precise conclusion is that the image remained powerful through all of them. Stone's health changed. Her finances changed. Her family life became contested. Her access to major work narrowed. The scene remained available, unaltered, and instantly recognizable. The person kept changing. Public memory kept returning to the version it already owned. Stone eventually found a form of creation that did not require a studio to decide whether she was still commercially useful. During the pandemic, she returned seriously to painting after beginning with a paint-by-numbers set. The practice developed into larger work and public exhibitions, but its importance to this case is more basic. Painting changed where authority ended. On a film, a performer contributes to an image controlled by many people. The director selects the frame. The cinematographer determines how the body is lit. The editor decides which take survives. Producers and distributors determine what reaches the public. Marketing departments decide which fragment will represent the whole work. On canvas, Stone decided what appeared, what remained hidden, and when the work was complete. Painting did not erase Basic Instinct. It did not remove the interrogation scene from circulation or prove that the scene had caused every later difficulty. It gave her control over the next image. That distinction kept the story from collapsing into a simple recovery narrative. Stone did not return to an untouched self, waiting beneath the Hollywood persona. She built a new creative practice, while the old image continued to exist. Reclamation meant adding authorship, not pretending the archive could be cleared. Her memoir, The Beauty of Living Twice, performed a similar function in words. Stone described the filming, the screening, the confrontation with Verhoeven, and the choice not to seek an injunction. The book did not settle the dispute. Verhoeven continued to reject her version. What the memoir changed was the balance of the record. For decades, the scene had circulated mainly through the finished film and the authority of the director who approved it. Stone's account placed the performer's memory beside the image. The public no longer had only the scene and the auteur's explanation. It also had the voice of the person whose body made the scene possible. That was a form of authorship Hollywood had not granted during production. Stone did not argue that Catherine Trammell lacked artistic value. She understood why the sequence worked and why the character became unforgettable. The tension in her account comes from that recognition. She could admire the effectiveness of the scene and still object to what she says she had been told before filming. Popular culture often resists that kind of double truth. It prefers either complete victimhood or complete consent, complete exploitation or complete empowerment. Stone's history does not fit either category cleanly. The film gave her extraordinary opportunity. The scene gave the film extraordinary value. Stone chose not to stop its release. She also maintained that the level of exposure had not been explained to her accurately. All of those facts belong in the same record. Her later testimony, therefore, did not ask the public to forget basic instinct. It asked the public to stop allowing the finished image to explain every stage of its own creation. The scene showed Catherine controlling the men who watched her. Stone's account asked who controlled the camera, the cut, and the information available before the shot was made. The work remained powerful. The history around it became less comfortable. That may be the most meaningful control she recovered. She could not own every replay. She could challenge the story attached to it. The image had spoken for decades without needing context. Stone made sure it would no longer speak alone. Once Stone's version entered the public record, the scene could no longer remain only a triumph of provocation. It became a case file about several different kinds of power operating at once. Catherine Trammell had power inside the fiction. Stone had power as a performer. Verhoeven had power over direction. Producers and editors held power over the finished film. The studio held power over distribution and marketing. The audience created the image's afterlife through attention, repetition, and memory. Those powers were connected, but they were never equal. Stone's performance remains essential to the scene's success. Without her timing, intelligence, and calm, the interrogation would not carry the same force. The image was not made famous by exposure alone. It became famous because Stone made Catherine appear more composed than every man trying to control her. That achievement belongs to the actress. The framing, edit, and release did not belong to her alone. Film tends to hide those divisions because collaboration is compressed into one finished object. The audience sees the result, not the negotiations. It cannot see what the performer was told, what the director intended, what the editor selected, or which concerns were ignored once the scene proved valuable. The final cut creates the impression that the production shared one mind. Stone and Verhoeven's disagreement shows that it did not. A serious history does not need to decide that the scene has no artistic merit. It does not need to deny the power of Stone's work or the precision of Verhoeven's direction. It needs to stop treating artistic success as proof that every part of the production process was fair. A scene can work brilliantly and still contain an unresolved argument about disclosure. Hollywood prestige often protects itself by separating the work from the conditions behind it. Once a film enters the canon, objections to production can be treated as threats to the art rather than evidence about how the art was made. The director remains the visionary. The performer becomes the fearless body inside the vision. Any later objection appears to arrive after the fact, even when it concerns the original filming. Basic instinct benefited from that structure. Verhoeven remained identified as the author of the provocation. Stone remained identified as the person exposed by it. His intention entered discussions of filmmaking. Her objection often entered discussions of celebrity controversy. One account was treated as artistic context. The other risked being treated as personal reaction. That division protected the work more effectively than any formal verdict could have done. The scene did not need the dispute resolved. It needed the dispute to remain less memorable than the image. The studio could keep selling the film. Critics could keep discussing its boldness. Audiences could keep repeating the reference. Stone could speak, but she had to speak against something already fixed in public memory. The image arrived first and required almost no explanation. Her account arrived later and required people to reconsider what they thought they already knew. Familiarity often feels like proof. After decades of repetition, the scene appeared inevitable. Its confidence suggested that everyone involved must have understood the same plan. Stone's testimony introduced uncertainty into an image designed to look completely controlled. That uncertainty is now part of the legacy. The audience is not responsible for settling a dispute that the available record cannot settle. It is responsible for recognizing that the dispute exists. The scene can no longer be discussed honestly, as though Stone and Verhoeven remember its creation in the same way. The work survived cleaner than the performer's memory did. That is the central reputation war. Basic Instinct became a culturally protected object that could be celebrated, replayed, and sold. Verhoeven's authority as an auteur remained attached to the design. Stone's body remained attached to the controversy. When she later challenged the production story, she had to argue against the cultural weight of the image itself. Her success made that struggle more complicated, not less. Basic Instinct gave her wealth, visibility, and opportunities. She used some of that leverage to shape later films. Casino proved that her range extended far beyond Catherine Tremell. Her survival after the stroke revealed a life more difficult than the screen myth. Her painting established a form of authorship outside studio control. The image still remained the fastest way to summarize her. That is what permanent public ownership can do. It does not erase the person completely. It makes one version of the person easier to retrieve than every other version. Stone's case, therefore, asks more than whether she was misled. It asks how Hollywood handles uncertainty once uncertainty threatens a profitable masterpiece. It asks why the director's memory can remain part of the work's prestige, while the performer's memory is treated as a dispute beside it. It asks why a woman's apparent control inside a scene can be used to dismiss questions about her control during production. Most of all, it asks who benefits when the public keeps the simplest version. The studio benefits because the asset remains clean enough to sell. The auteur benefits because provocation continues to read as artistic courage. The audience benefits from an image that can be recognized instantly. Stone benefits from the fame the scene created, but she also carries the explanation, the typecasting, and the burden of being identified with a moment she says she did not fully understand in advance. The benefits were real, so were the costs. That is why this story cannot end with a verdict about one disputed day on set. The available evidence does not allow a clean verdict. It ends with a clearer map of power. The character controlled the room, the actress controlled the performance, the director controlled the frame, the production controlled the cut, the studio controlled the release, the public controlled the replay. Stone spent decades trying to control the meaning. Basic Instinct will remain a major erotic thriller and one of the films that defined the early 1990s. The interrogation scene will remain part of cinema history. Sharon Stone's performance deserves to remain central to that history. Her account of the production belongs there too. The question is no longer whether the scene should be remembered. It is whether the culture can remember it without repeating the same imbalance that created its reputation. Can the film keep its prestige while the performer's objection remains visible? Can audiences admire the scene without treating its success as proof that the process was beyond question? Can an iconic image remain powerful without being allowed to silence the person inside it? The scene has not changed. The history around it has. Basic instinct made the image permanent. Sharon Stone made the disagreement permanent too. The movie kept the moment. Verhoeven kept the authority of the auteur. The public kept the replay. Stone fought to keep her version of what happened. That is the bitter legacy. The work survived as art. The disputed image survived as culture. The person who carried it had to keep explaining the cost. Share your view in the comments and subscribe to Reputation Wars for more case files about the art that stayed protected and the people left carrying the burden.